Los Angeles, 1983. Inside the Shrine Auditorium, a massive charity gala was underway. An elegant night meant to showcase the finest classical, jazz, and orchestral musicians on the West Coast. The hall shimmered with gold light, gowns swept across the floor, and the air smelled faintly of perfume and polished wood. At the center of the stage stood a full orchestra preparing to perform an original piece written by a young, unknown composer named Daniel Mercer, only 23 years old. Daniel had poured his entire soul into this melody, his first major debut, his chance to finally step out of the shadows. He stood backstage shaking, heart pounding against his ribs as the conductor raised his baton. This was the biggest moment of Daniel's life. The opening notes drifted into the auditorium, soft, trembling, uncertain. The melody was beautiful, but the orchestra felt disconnected, hesitant. Something was missing, like a story whose final chapter had yet to be written. The audience exchanged glances. The conductor's brow tightened. Even the musicians sensed it. The piece wasn't landing the way Daniel hoped. Halfway through the introduction, a single violin entered with a high, fragile line that fluttered through the room like a wounded bird. And then it happened. The violinist faltered, just for a moment. A note slipped, thin and unstable. The orchestra wavered. The melody broke. The entire hall froze. A painful silence followed, thick, suffocating, merciless. The young composer backstage covered his face with both hands, devastated. His big moment, the performance he had dreamed about for years, was falling apart in front of donors, critics, and musical giants. The conductor tried to restart the flow, but the energy was gone, the spell broken. Whispers spread. A few heads shook. One composer muttered, "It's a shame. He's talented, but the piece isn't ready." Daniel felt his knees weaken. His breath turned shallow. And then, just when the silence grew unbearable, a familiar voice echoed from the back of the hall. Calm, warm, unmistakable. "Hold on, play that again." The audience turned. People gasped. Stevie Wonder, unexpected, unannounced, was stepping into the aisle, and instantly everything changed. A murmur spread across the Shrine Auditorium like a wave breaking over shore. Stevie Wonder, dressed simply in a dark suit, no spotlight, no fanfare, walked slowly down the aisle, guided only by the echo of the broken melody. Daniel Mercer's eyes widened backstage. He had no idea Stevie was even present. Stevie had not been listed as a guest, let alone a performer. But there he was, making his way toward the stage as if pulled by an invisible thread woven into the music itself. The audience parted for him instinctively, stepping aside with reverence, shock, and a strange sense of relief, as if a legend had just arrived to rescue the sinking moment. Stevie tilted his head, listening carefully to the silence that had settled like a bruise on the room. "Play the phrase again," he said softly. The conductor hesitated, astonished, but finally nodded to the orchestra. The violinist swallowed hard, lifted her bow, and replayed the fragile line that had shattered moments earlier. This time she hit every note, but something was still missing. Stevie nodded slowly, absorbing the timbre, the structure, the emotional shape of the melody. Then he turned toward the conductor. "It's beautiful," Stevie said, "but it's breathing alone." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. The conductor frowned respectfully. "What do you mean?" Stevie smiled gently. "A melody that tender, it needs a second heartbeat." The audience froze. The orchestra stared. Slowly, Stevie reached his hands out toward the nearest usher. "Take me to the piano." The usher guided him toward the grand piano, sitting like a silent giant at stage left. Daniel, backstage, felt his entire body tremble. The greatest musician alive was about to touch his music. Stevie sat down, felt for the keys, and placed his hands lightly on the warm ivory. The hall went utterly still. Thousands of breaths held, thousands of hearts suspended mid-beat. Stevie whispered to the violinist, "Start again, and this time, let me walk with you." She lifted her bow. The first note floated out, soft, cautious, and Stevie answered with a single chord beneath it, subtle but soul-filled. Gasps echoed across the auditorium. The violin's fragile cry suddenly had support, warmth, Context. Stevie struck another chord, then another, weaving himself beneath the melody like a protective tether. The orchestra listened, stunned, as the melody that had died moments earlier began to glow with new life. Daniel covered his mouth backstage, tears rising. His creation was breathing again, because Stevie Wonder had decided it deserved to live. As Stevie continued playing, the hall shifted, slowly at first. Then all at once. His chords weren't flashy or overpowering. They were gentle, intentional, like hands lifting a child who had stumbled. The violinist, emboldened by his presence, let her tone grow warmer, steadier. She played the melody again, and Stevie followed her like a shadow of light, filling the gaps she didn't even know were there. The conductor watched with a mixture of awe and surrender. This wasn't improvisation. This was restoration. Stevie wasn't rewriting the melody. He was revealing the truth inside it. "There you go," Stevie murmured softly, barely audible. "Now it sings." Daniel, still hidden backstage, felt his heart pound against his ribs. His entire spirit pulled him toward the stage, though his feet felt rooted in fear and disbelief. Seeing Stevie Wonder play his melody, something he wrote alone in a cramped apartment after weeks of self-doubt, felt unreal, almost holy. Critics in the audience leaned forward, pens forgotten. Musicians exchanged looks of astonishment. Stevie's playing was deceptively simple, yet it changed everything. Every chord opened a new emotional door in Daniel's composition. Every touch of the keys reshaped the landscape of the orchestra. He wasn't taking over, he was illuminating. Then Stevie made a choice that electrified the entire room. He shifted into a soft, rhythmic pattern beneath the violin, adding pulse, breath, heartbeat. The melody, once fragile, now floated over a foundation that felt alive. The violinist nearly gasped mid-phrase. The conductor's jaw tightened in stunned admiration. And then, as if a spell had broken, the cellos entered, hesitantly at first, then with quiet confidence, responding to Stevie's rhythm. The violas followed, then the flute. One by one, the orchestra found its courage, found its footing, found the life inside the composition that had been missing moments earlier. Stevie nodded with each new instrument that joined, as if guiding them with energy rather than sight. Soon the hall was filled with a tapestry of sound. Daniel's melody at the center, Stevie's pulse beneath it, the orchestra wrapping around them both like a reborn creature taking its first full breath. A woman in the audience whispered, hand trembling over her mouth, He saved the piece." Another whispered, "No, he revealed it." And backstage, Daniel Mercer finally stepped toward the light, pulled forward by a force stronger than fear, the sound of his own, creation coming alive for the very first time. Daniel stepped into the wings, barely able to stand as he watched the transformation happening before his eyes. His piece, his fragile, trembling piece, was blossoming into something vibrant, sweeping, transcendent. Stevie sensed movement and turned his head slightly toward the sound. He didn't need to see the young composer to know he was there. "Come on out here," Stevie said softly into the microphone, his tone gentle but commanding. The audience turned, searching for the face behind the melody. Daniel froze, terrified. His heart hammered so violently it felt like it might split open. But something about Stevie's voice, warm, welcoming, unwavering, pulled him forward. The backstage curtain parted as Daniel emerged under the stage lights, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy. The crowd murmured, recognizing instantly that this trembling young man was the creator of the music now filling the room. Stevie smiled in Daniel's direction. "This melody," he said, tapping a single key so the note shimmered through the hall, "has something special in it." Daniel's breath hitched. He opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Stevie continued, "It's soft, but powerful, vulnerable, but brave, kind of like the one who wrote it, right?" Laughter, gentle, affectionate, spread across the audience. Daniel managed a tiny nod. Overwhelmed, Stevie motioned toward the empty space beside him. "Come closer, brother." Daniel walked slowly, his legs trembling so badly he nearly stumbled. When he reached the piano, Stevie extended a hand, patting the air until Daniel guided it to his own. The The contact steadied them both. The entire hall seemed to breathe in at once. Stevie leaned toward Daniel. "Play your melody," he said quietly. Daniel blinked in shock. "Me?" he whispered. I can't. Not here." He gestured weakly toward the massive auditorium, toward the orchestra, toward the glittering chandeliers. "I'm nobody." Stevie shook his head. "Anybody who can write something this honest is not nobody." The words hit Daniel so deeply that his eyes filled instantly. "Come on," Stevie said. "Sit." The young composer lowered himself beside Stevie, trembling. The orchestra waited, silent and reverent. Stevie placed Daniel's hands on the keys. "Just play what you wrote," he whispered. "Don't think about them. Think about why you wrote it in the first place." And with the world watching, Daniel took his first shaky breath and pressed the first note. The sound was small, fragile, just like before. But this time, he wasn't alone. Stevie was beside him, ready to lift the melody the moment it faltered, and that changed everything. Daniel's fingers trembled violently as they hovered above the keys, but the warmth of Stevie's presence anchored him. He pressed the second note, then the third, each one slightly stronger than the last. The audience leaned so far forward that it felt like the entire hall was physically holding him up. Stevie waited, not jumping in, not correcting, not overshadowing. He let Daniel expose the raw skeleton of the melody first, imperfect and shaking, but undeniably honest. When Daniel reached a phrase where his hand hesitated, Stevie gently placed his own hand beside his. "Right there," he whispered. "That hesitation, that's emotion. Don't run from it." Daniel shuddered. It was the first time anyone had told him that. His flaws were part of the music, not failures but fingerprints. He played the phrase again, this time letting it break slightly. The audience heard it. They felt it. It humanized the entire piece, and Stevie nodded. "Good. Now let's breathe some soul into it." Stevie entered with a soft chord, warm, round, grounding. Daniel gasped softly at the sound, eyes widening. It was as if the world had suddenly shifted into color. His melody wasn't frail anymore. It stood taller, fuller, supported by the richest harmonic cushion he had ever imagined. "Feel that," Stevie murmured. Daniel nodded, unable to speak. "That's your melody finally exhaling." Daniel played again, this time with a hint of courage, shaping the trembling edges of his fingers. Stevie followed each phrase, weaving harmony around it like light, wrapping around a silhouette. The conductor, standing before the orchestra, wiped a tear before raising his baton. The orchestra entered again, cautiously at first, this time guided not by technical precision, but by Stevie's emotional compass. Cellos hummed beneath them, violins shimmered above, woodwinds breathed gently between the spaces. Daniel's melody, reborn, filled the Shrine Auditorium with something luminous. Every person in the room felt the transformation. Critics lowered their pens entirely, now simply witnesses. Veteran musicians stared, stunned, as Stevie, without sheet music, without preparation, unlocked the true essence of a piece they had struggled to interpret minutes earlier. Daniel grew more confident with each passing measure. His hands steadied, his phrasing deepened. The music was no longer escaping him. He was finally leading it. When he reached the main theme, he played it with a clarity and emotion that made several audience members put their hands over their hearts. Stevie added a gentle ripple under Daniel's final notes, a flourish so delicate it felt like brushstrokes of light. When the theme resolved, a hush settled over the entire hall, deeper than any silence before it. And Daniel realized, with a rush of emotion so overwhelming it nearly knocked the breath out of him, Stevie Wonder hadn't just helped him play his melody, he had helped him understand it. Daniel held the last note just long enough to let its vibrations settle into his bones. When he lifted his hands, a trembling exhale left his chest, a sound half relief, half rebirth. The hall remained silent, suspended in a moment too fragile to break. Stevie let the quiet linger before gently playing a single chord beneath Daniel's ending, tying the melody closed like a ribbon around a gift. Then he spoke softly, not to the audience, not to the orchestra, but directly to Daniel. "You hear that? That's your voice." The young composer's breath caught. No mentor, no teacher, no conductor had ever said those words to him. He felt them sink into his heart like truth, finally finding a home. Daniel bowed his head, eyes flooding, overwhelmed by the realization that the melody he had doubted, criticized, and feared wasn't broken. It simply hadn't been heard the right way, until now. The conductor, moved beyond professionalism, raised his baton again. "Let's continue," he said, but his voice wavered. From the second movement, Daniel's eyes widened. He whispered, "Are we doing it?" Stevie chuckled. "Brother, we're not stopping now." The strings entered, this time with a grounded confidence, letting Stevie's harmonic framework guide them. Daniel, still at the piano, followed Stevie's lead as they drifted into the next movement. It built slowly, soft horn swells, a flute echoing Daniel's initial theme, violas laying a warm undercurrent. Stevie filled the spaces with subtle chords, never overpowering, always inviting. The music began to soar higher than Daniel had ever imagined when he wrote it. Themes stitched themselves together, instruments breathed in unison, and the composition blossomed from something tentative into a sweeping emotional journey. The audience watched in open-mouthed awe. Some whispered through tears, "How is this happening?" Then came the section Daniel feared most, the bold, exposed transitional passage that always felt too heavy for the orchestra, too exposed for a young composer. Daniel's hands trembled again. He glanced at Stevie instinctively. Stevie leaned closer and whispered, "Courage is what turns notes into meaning." Daniel inhaled deeply, placed his hands back on the keys, and played the passage he'd spent months doubting. And this time, it didn't fall apart. Stevie entered behind him with a rhythmic pulse so soft it felt like a heartbeat. That tiny hint of motion filled the space Daniel had never known how to fill. The orchestra followed. What once felt awkward now felt inevitable, beautiful even. The hall swelled with sound, each measure blooming like a revelation. Daniel felt his chest tighten with emotion as he realized the truth. The melody was never cold, never empty. It just needed someone to show him how alive it could be, and Stevie Wonder had done exactly that. The final movement rose like a sunrise, slow at first, then radiant. The orchestra played with a confidence that bordered on reverence, as if every musician understood they were inside a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Stevie's chords shimmered beneath the ensemble, guiding them without controlling them, elevating Daniel's composition into a living, breathing force. Daniel felt the music surge around him, through him, carrying him like a wave he had once feared but now trusted completely. His fingers no longer trembled. They moved with purpose, with clarity, with something he'd never felt before, ownership, not arrogance, ownership. The sense that the melody wasn't something he was trying to prove. It was something he was finally allowing to speak. Stevie sensed the shift instantly. He smiled, wide and proud, and dropped into a lush harmonic spread that made the hall gasp. The brass section entered in response, bold but warm, filling the auditorium with a golden bloom of sound. The timpani rolled softly underneath, while the woodwinds twirled around Daniel's theme like ribbons of color. Every instrument found its place, every phrase aligned, as if the entire composition had always been destined for this exact moment, in this exact hall, with these exact two men at the piano. When the orchestra reached the climactic swell, Stevie leaned into a rich, gospel-infused chord progression that transformed Daniel's classical motif into something transcendent. The audience felt the emotion explode through the hall. Some stood involuntarily, some covered their mouths, some simply wept, and then silence. A long, trembling, sacred silence after the final note faded. Not a single person dared to break it. Daniel stared at the keys, chest rising and falling in shock. Stevie reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You brought it to life," Stevie whispered. Daniel shook his head, tears spilling down his cheeks. "No, you did," Stevie squeezed gently. "No, my friend, I just opened the door. You walked through it." The audience rose all at once in a thunderous standing ovation, so loud it shook the rafters. People cried openly. Musicians applauded with genuine awe. Even the critics stood, hands trembling, knowing they had witnessed something they would never be able to fully explain on paper. Daniel stood beside Stevie, overwhelmed by gratitude, disbelief, and a sense of destiny he had never felt before. Stevie lifted Daniel's hand into the air, presenting him not as a student, not as a project, but as an equal, an artist. The ovation grew louder. Daniel's world changed forever in those minutes. His melody, once fragile and uncertain, had not only survived, it had soared. And it soared because when the room fell cold and silent, Stevie Wonder walked in, not to take the spotlight, not to steal the moment, but to breathe life into a song that deserved to be heard.